Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 27th of August in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Donald Trump vows to go to court to remove Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook as the White House considers ways to extend its influence across the Fed's regional banks.
As UK government borrowing costs come close to 1998 highs, we look at whether the data used to measure the country's economy is up to the job.
Plus, we have liftoff. SpaceX successfully launches its Starship reusable rocket, surviving most of its journey back to Earth.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The White House is exploring ways to exert more influence over the Fed's 12 regional banks, including how their presidents are vetted and chosen. That's according to sources who've spoken to Bloomberg. The reporting comes as Donald Trump says he's ready for a legal fight with Fed Governor Lisa Cook, adding that he's already looking for her replacement.
Well, we have some very good people for that position, and I think we have some very good people. We're down to... I think I maybe in my own mind have somebody that I like, but I deal with Scott and I deal with Howard, and we're dealing with a lot of people actually that are going to be involved in that decision ultimately. It's a very important decision.
The US President there referring to the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who would both be expected to weigh in on any possible successor. In a statement released on Tuesday, the Federal Reserve said it will abide by any court ruling regarding Cook. If Trump succeeds, he could secure a dovish majority on the Fed board as he pushes for lower interest rates. We got reaction from former Fed Vice Chair Lael Brainard.
I think the Federal Reserve is in an incredibly difficult position here, but you have to remember this is not about an individual governor. This is really an unprecedented attack on the independence of the Federal Reserve as an institution.
Former Fed Vice Chair Lael Brainard speaking there as concerns grow that President Trump's unprecedented and escalating attack on the Federal Reserve runs the risk of driving long-term borrowing costs higher.
Now, the United States has placed a 50% tariff on some Indian goods, which came into effect only a short time ago. The levy is double the existing rate and threatens to damage the export competitiveness of the world's fastest growing major economy. President Trump says that the charge is punishment for India's ongoing purchases of Russian oil, which he said is funding Putin's war in Ukraine. But despite the move, India and Russia have pledged to increase their annual trade over the next 5 years by 50% to $100 billion. New Delhi has also called the US's actions against it unfair, unjustified and unreasonable.
The asset manager Carmignac is warning that French government borrowing costs could spike to 100 basis points over their German peers if the government collapses in 10 days' time. That will be the widest yield spread since the height of the Eurozone debt crisis in 2012. Ahead of the confidence vote on the 8th of September, opposition to French Prime Minister François Bayrou's government is growing. The leader of the far-right National Rally Party, Jordan Bardella, told France's TF1 television that he won't back the Premier.
We will obviously be voting against the government's confidence motion and are seeking potentially a new government or new president if this one has to choose constitutional tools to get out of this crisis or hear what the majority of the French people want today.
Jordan Bardella speaking there through a translator during an interview with France's TF1. 3 of the major opposition groups have now indicated they will vote against the confidence motion next month, increasing the likelihood of a resignation. Bayrou is calling the vote in an effort to consolidate support in Parliament for €44 billion worth of spending cuts and tax increases that he considers vital to avert disaster for the public finances.
Now, the yield on UK 30-year bonds climbed close to a 27-year high yesterday, piling pressure on Keir Starmer's government to tighten its fiscal policy. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts reports.
Long-dated gilt yields surged yesterday as markets caught up with Monday's moves in the US after the bank holiday closure. 30-year yields are now just a whisker away from 5.66%, a level they last saw in 1998. The high cost of borrowing adds yet another headwind for the Chancellor as she works out how to make the sums add up ahead of her autumn budget. And if she was hoping for some relief on interest rates, Catherine Mann, who sits on the BOE's rate-setting committee, says now is not the time. She says policy is not currently tight enough and holding rates is the appropriate thing to do. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
Nigel Farage, the leader of Britain's Reform UK party, has vowed to expel tens of thousands of asylum-seekers if he wins the next general election. As part of a programme dubbed Operation Restoring Justice, Farage said a reform-led government would remove Britain from the European Court of Human Rights and carry out mass deportations.
The only way we will stop the boats is by detaining and deporting absolutely anyone that comes via that route. And if we do that, the boats will stop coming within days.
The Reform UK leader added that he would scrap the country's Human Rights Act to remove legal routes of appeal and disapply the 1951 Refugee Convention for 5 years. The CEO of the Refugee Council, Enver Solomon, denounced the toxic narratives that dehumanise refugees and fuel fear and division across the country.
Elon Musk's SpaceX has successfully launched a test flight of its Starship rocket, achieving new technological milestones after a year of fiery setbacks. Billed as the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, it successfully deployed satellites for the first time and survived most of its journey back down to Earth. Let's have a listen to the moment that it launched from SpaceX's Starbase in South Texas.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The rocket's Super Heavy booster separated as planned before splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico. Starship is at the heart of SpaceX's plans to put Starlink internet satellites into Earth's orbit and to one day put humans on Mars.
Those are your top stories on the markets. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index down by 0.1%. European stock futures are pointing higher after we saw another day of sell-off yesterday. So Euro Stoxx 50 futures are up by 0.3%. On currency markets, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index 0.2 higher. The euro is trading at 116.14. The pound at 134.47. And the 10-year Treasury yield is up a basis point at 4.27%.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on Donald Trump's pressure on the Fed's Lisa Cook, plus the latest in the barrage of criticism over UK economic data. But there's another story that's caught our eye, and of course the eye of perhaps the entire internet.
Where were you, Caroline, when you heard the news?
So I shall not reveal, but I am totally fascinated by Taylor Swift and an
Instagram post that shook the world.
Yes.
I think Taylor Swift is engaged to Travis Kelce, in case you hadn't heard, and the internet is full of people reacting to it, which I think is more interesting than the actual point
buying
itself.
The dress and studying the flowers.
But look, us being Bloomberg, we've also been looking at how people have been spending their money around this as well. So, for example, on betting website, gamblers are making wagers on when the wedding will take place. Apparently $80,000 worth of bets were placed on one website in the hours after the Instagram post announcing the engagement. Apparently on Polymarket, bettors are going as far as to gamble when the couple might have a baby. Others are also convinced the singer is now going to headline the 2026 Super Bowl halftime show. So there are business opportunities everywhere you look in this one. It's actually a very interesting reflection of the gambling frenzy that's been going on in the US. Americans betting billions on sport, but also cultural events. In advance of this, around $250,000 had changed hands on one website for bets on whether Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift would get engaged this year. Odds were hovering, in case you were wondering, at about 40% going into this week.
Yeah.
Other effects, we're seeing this already. The dress that Taylor Swift wore in the engagement photos sold out, apparently.
And all the estimates of how much and what the design of the ring was all about. I mean,
the merchandising possibilities really are endless if you think about it. Yeah. Anyway, plenty more to read on this news. We'll put some of the links to our stories on this on our podcast show notes.
Now, President Trump says that he is prepared for a legal fight with Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook as he attempts to gain more control over the US central bank. Joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg's Markets Live strategist, Mary Nicola. Mary, good morning. President Trump said yesterday, we'll have a majority, i.e. 4 out of the 7 Fed board members as Trump appointees, and they then have influence over regional Fed governors. So I suppose the fundamental question is how likely likely is that? How quickly could it happen?
Well, we know for one thing what is going to happen with Lisa Cook in terms of it's going to the court, potentially going to the courts, and that could mean a very long, drawn-out legal battle. So it might not be that swift that we get a resolution on what happens. But even if not, the whole fact that we're going through this long legal battle, the fact that President Trump is trying to influence the central bank is quite nerve-wracking for markets, and it's going to weigh on the dollar because at the end of the day, you're undermining the credibility of the Fed, you're infringing on the independence of the Fed, and that is essentially one of the key cornerstones of policy in the U.S. So a lot of it for now, it seems like the reaction is a bit complacent, but if he gets what he wants, it's actually quite damaging for the dollar and U.S. assets.
Well, I suppose let's talk about how this could play out down the line as well, because even a protracted legal battle also casts a shadow over the Fed. And of course, we're thinking about the decision over the Fed chair next year too. I mean, what is the outlook or the market considerations about what the Federal Reserve could look like in a couple of months' time?
Yeah, there's obviously we know, and it's been very clear that the administration wants lower rates. So I think what you end up getting, especially if there is a lot of influence from the political side, is that you get short end rates quite well anchored. The problem really comes in the back end, where concerns about inflation expectations, especially if you have PCE coming through, or if you have, the concerns about a policy mistake. And of course, just where the trajectory of inflation could be potentially going with tariffs coming through. So I think the end result is going to be a lot of emphasis on the back end or pressure on the back end of the curve. But what you'll see is more of a lock-in on the front end, because there will be heightened expectations of more aggressive easing if the administration really gets what it wants.
So that's the sort of thinking around, an independent Federal Reserve. Maybe that looks less certain now. Obviously, that being, the bedrock of US and global markets, or certainly a significant one. There is also another political crisis, though, that we should be discussing, and that's in France over the budget, which has seen French borrowing costs surge, and Carmignac warning that the yield spread between French and German bonds could hit 100 basis points. Now, why is that so important?
Yeah, we're not. It's nothing new that we're getting some of these political rumblings from France, and we've seen it before in 2024 when Macron called a snap elections. We saw it again when the Prime Minister was government first collapse. So there has been a bit of a repeat. The problem is, and we've seen it before, is the fact that there's a greater scrutiny on debt sustainability, whether you have it from the US or from France. The fact is, government debts are ballooning. We already see it in the borrowing costs for gilts, for example, as well. So this just places greater scrutiny under debt sustainability, and it puts even more pressure on the long end of the curve, and that's unlikely to go away. So we don't have the vote until September 8th, so that's going to likely lead to a lot of investor angst in the run-up, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on French assets as a result.
And we'll continue to monitor that as it develops. Mary Nicola, for now, our Markets Live strategist. Thank you. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Now, Britain's Royal Economic Society is the latest to wade into the crisis around the UK's economic data. The body for British economists is warning that experts can no longer properly analyse the gender pay gap, as well as other wage and inequality measures. It's the latest blow as the government, civil servants and bankers all vent their frustration at the deterioration of the UK's official statistics. Bloomberg's James Wilcock joins us now for more on this. So just tell us and explain a bit more about the state of this problem with economic data.
I think, Caroline, imagine an ideal economy and what you would want to know about it. In an ideal world, you'd love to know how much people are paid, how much many people are in work, and maybe what's the GDP, how much the economy is worth. Now, this sound is me getting out my laundry list of all the statistics that have been delayed or suspended or corrected in the past 3 years by the Office of National Statistics in the UK. So labour force, employment, which has been suspended entirely until 2027, producer prices, trade data, GDP, business surveys, and retail sales. So, like, you pick your indicator of how the economy is going. The ONS has, in some fashion, had issues with that data. The latest one being retail sales, which was just last week. It has been delayed by 2 weeks while they do quality assurance. Now, we're now seeing the second order effects from that. We've already heard from government ministers and politicians and central bankers and financiers saying this is difficult. But we're now seeing academics weigh in. And the Royal Economic Society is one of the world's oldest and most prestigious economic associations, and they're saying it's easier to study other countries than the UK, where they're based at this point, in terms of how to look after the labour market. And then on top of that, a recent review by the British Journal of Industrial Relations found the ONS has underestimated the gender pay gap for 20 years now by 1%. They also say that they got the number of people on the minimum wage wrong by 20%. And now the Resolution Foundation have released a rival index looking at unemployment, which predicts will be at 5% by the end of the year. So other think tanks are trying to fill the gap where official statistics used to be. It all adds up to what is effectively this sort of vacuum where UK official statistics used to be.
So what's being done to fix it, James?
It depends what you view as the problem, Stephen. In many ways, the ONS is a very good metaphor for the UK more broadly. You've got a changing society, you have limited resources, you have a response to COVID, the pandemic, and questions over productivity. If you look at the surveys, the ONS say the surveys on labour are being fixed, new leaders are in place, and they say they are urgently refocusing resources on their core economic outputs. And so, if you think the problems are survey-based, they're hoping new techniques will fix it. If you think this is an austerity problem, £10 million is being cut from non-urgent economic data to go into sort of the essential areas. But a Bloomberg analysis says there is going to be a 6% funding cut in real terms by 2029. If you think this is a problem of culture and productivity, it's worth noting in 2007, 90% of the ONS's London-based staff quit rather than move to Newport, so a levelling up sort of question. In 2020, over the pandemic, they all moved to home working, and the ONS hired people as far abroad as Northern Ireland, as far flung away from Newport. Then in 2023, when errors in the data started creeping in, they were then told to move back to 40% home working, which means that the ONS are currently on strike, where they're doing a zero office attendance policy. All of this, depending on how you want to look at it, could be sort of the problem or the range of problems. It's not a short-term thing that can be fixed very easily.
Yeah, so it's funding, it's people, but maybe it's also the fact that we're becoming such a digitised economy, and so the way that you collect statistics is really changing. Lots and lots of issues then, really, to get to grips with. And it all comes at kind of quite a difficult time also for the government, certainly when we're thinking about the autumn budget and government finances, and an interesting interview.
I mean, arguably this could be one of the worst possible moments to come, right? You have high inflation, you have a weakening jobs market. This is the moment that central bankers sort of test their mettle and earn their stripes. And meanwhile, interest rates being so high is putting pressure on bond yields. They are now higher than the sudden spike under the former Prime Minister Liz Truss, who, as you hinted there, Caroline, Bloomberg spoke to yesterday. Now, she thinks politicians here should be taking a leaf out of President Trump's approach to the Fed.
I think the Bank of England needs to be accountable to politicians. I think the current system doesn't work. This is why I'm very sympathetic to what Donald Trump is saying about the Fed. Monetary policy is incredibly important.
Now, you can hear that full interview on the Odd Lots podcast later this week. But with central bankers under scrutiny, and as we head into, like you say, Karen, into this difficult autumn where Chancellor Rachel Reeves will be fielding endless questions about taxes, she'll be hoping for better economic data to try and give her more fiscal space. But if that data does come at this crucial moment, will we trust it?
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.